Today is the 5th day of the September 89 7-day retreat at Springwater. Most of what has come up in meetings recently, and sometimes right at the beginning, are questions about the self. What is it? Can there ever be any freedom from it? Or is it an inevitable part of us? The part being the idea of an independent, permanent me. And of course the whole question which we broached the other day, our talk on fear. What is this fear of dying? And is that linked, we're asking, to this deep-seated conviction that there is a self, a me? Is the fear of death linked with the attachment to that idea, image, story of me? Sometimes, it hasn't happened in this particular retreat, people argue with me over this emphasis on the me here, and that it's just because we keep talking about it, people get into this vein of thinking about themselves as a me. It would be so nice to find entirely new words so we can look at this thing which is going on in all of us, this process, freshly. Does it take fresh words or does it take a fresh look? Which is not easy when words are remembered and known and have become sort of used. Because these words then immediately trigger associations of knowledge and remembrance in the brain, and that may prevent the directness of looking. So let's keep in mind from the very beginning that the words that are used are only pointers towards something that is directly observable within ourselves and in each other and in our relationship with each other. If we're at all interested to listen and look and find out, regardless of the pain or hurt or anger or fear or sorrow that may come in looking directly at what is going on in ourselves and each other. Someone just told me this morning, in sitting in the solarium, suddenly feeling this sort of nervousness and fear at the thought of seeing Toni and having to have a question. Or what am I going to say? I ought to prepare something, and the sort of inner restlessness and agitation coming with these thoughts. I ought to prepare something for seeing Toni. And she said, you've talked about it so many times. And I've understood it so clearly when you've said it, about this whole gulf that we create about teacher and student through imagery, ideas from the past. I've understood it all. Clearly, intellectually, and maybe I've also seen it in the past, but I had to see it again right now. There it was, and it was observable. And when something is seen directly, not known from having understood it in the past and remembering what one has understood, but if something is seen directly, then with that comes a new freedom from the power of our emotions and thoughts, which otherwise run powerfully and automatically, without our being aware or deeply aware of them, and direct our reactions and responses to each other, unbeknownst, unawares. Also, let me say before we start in on this exploration of the me this morning, that whatever is said is not said judgmentally. We automatically hear something that has with it the overtones of danger or consequences that are painful or violent. If we listen to that, we think it's bad. We're listening to something that's bad, and then in looking at it and discovering this in oneself, I mean, immediately shut down through judgment. I don't want to be in touch with all this bad stuff in myself. Sometimes, also not in this retreat, people have said, why do you always talk about negative stuff? Why don't you talk about something positive? About human beings. But it is precisely the fear producing and anger producing, sorrow producing, division and violence producing thoughts, memories, images in human beings that we need to look at. Not because they're bad, but because they are what we just said they are. And unless they are discovered within each one of us by ourselves, not by someone else, but by oneself, they operate and create the chaos and havoc and violence, wars in the world which are going on right now and have been going on. And not just out there in the world, but in our own family, in our own intimate relationships with mates, children, friends, or enemies. A question just comes to mind which someone asked after the last retreat. He didn't ask it of me. Somebody told me that this person had brought it up when several people were together discussing after retreat. This person asked, why is it so important? Why is there such importance placed on finding out about the self? I don't know how the discussion went. I wasn't there. But it would be interesting if one has that feeling to find out, where does this question come from? Not immediately give reasons why it's important to find out about the self. Why is one questioning it? How is one living? What is one observing in oneself, in one's relationships, and all around one? It's not required, if one comes here, that one has to examine the self. It's not a requirement. It's not our dogma or doctrine that holds us together. I hope not. For myself, I am vitally interested in it. Because having observed it over many years, it becomes so clear that the attachment to the notion of self, to the story of me and my past, my present, my future, and the attachment to those who share the story or reinforce and support the story, who are part of that story, the attachment to that inevitably breeds division among us and within oneself. Because life, from moment to moment, the aliveness of it, is not a story. It's facts happening. And approaching it with imagery and all the wants and fears that come out of this imagery is missing the mark, is not perceiving accurately oneself or others. We're using these words very carefully, because in carefully observing oneself and others, one finds so little difference in the fundamental processes that rule our lives and create division, sorrow, violence, fear, and a tremendous yearning, craving for pleasure to drown out all the other, or get relief from it at times. Recently there was an article, about 2 pages in a Newsweek, which was entitled, "Why We Love to Hate." I don't remember all the details of the article, but it was quite full of insights about how we live in a need for enemies. And the article, if I remember correctly, said it starts already in children who, in forming their little gangs, need enemy gangs to feel more cohesion in their own. Somehow or other, the article, the writer seemed to stop there, so that was the root of the need for enemies, that it already starts in childhood. Needing a feeling of cohesion with kids, and that feeling of cohesion and belongingness being enhanced by having enemies other than oneself, on whom one can project all the adverse things that one doesn't want to have exist in oneself. Because one can question, why do children need to gang up for feelings of security? Why? What in children already kindles this need for ganging up together? Are we so deeply, basically insecure that this is the best or only way of making ourselves feel secure, belonging to a group which enhances itself inevitably by having the outgroupers? Or has one already imbibed from parents, neighbors, TV shows, that this is the way things are? There are groups, friendly groups and enemy groups. And to feel secure and belonging, one needs to join one. Maybe the family already is that way, is structured that way, with a lot of disparaging talk about the neighbors or other minority groups. Other ethnic groups, people. And all children are just little living antennae. They pick up everything. I read recently how a baby can already tell whether the mother feels friendly towards somebody coming into the house or not, and responds accordingly, without any verbal interchange at all. And we as parents or adults are so unaware of the remarks we drop about others, or so negligent, inattentive of it. And the kids pick it up, because what the parents say has tremendous value to a child who is 1/5 the size, maybe 1/4. Children living among giants. All-powerful giants who are the life-giving force. Life-giving or potentially death-dealing, or at least danger-dealing force. So whatever comes out of the mouth of these giants is weighted with value and importance as far as a child is concerned. That's where we pick up our first opinions and prejudices, or feelings of who are our people. To whom we belong, in whose presence there is some safety and security, and outside of whose presence there is enmity and danger, badness. Of course, during Hitler times, when I grew up in Germany, creating the supreme enemy out of the Jewish people brought tremendous cohesion to the Germans. I can witness that. I've witnessed that. Not to all of them. Some people had an intelligence about them that did not go along with it. But having someone, some people, some group upon whom to project everything that one cannot or will not accept, see or accept in oneself, is a highly energizing force for a nation or a group or a tribe. Because this was clearly not the only incident in history. It's taking place everywhere. The article mentions the Turks and Cypriots wearing different colored sashes to be sure to recognize who the enemy is. Both of them. Each one has to recognize who the enemy is. Not only the one group, the other one too. And then wearing certain colors, badges, symbols, flags. To demonstrate, to manifest who one is and who one is not. For I don't know how many years Iran and Iraq were killing each other off. It wasn't even two different religions. The identity lay someplace else, in nationality. And in countries where one thinks war and violence could be a thing of the past, and Northern Ireland is not a thing of the past, it's a thing of the living presence. In-group fighting and terrorizing out-group and vice versa. And each individual is not just a group. Each individual is that group, wears that color, is proud of its history, proud of its arms, proud of its dead, proud of its weapons. Weapons are often displayed in parks. Cannon. You see a beautiful park someplace in a city and there's a cannon sitting there. What is that doing there? Or some man on a horse. Memorizing when we won over the enemies. To become free. Free from what? just said a man on a horse. It all seems such a masculine affair, but it isn't. It isn't just a masculine affair. Women are into it too, because women raise these children in patriotism. Dying for one's country, if it's in the defense of one's country. I saw a spot on television a while ago, maybe a year ago or so, where a woman was being interviewed. I don't remember if she was Israeli or Palestinian, and it doesn't matter. She said, and if all of our children and grandchildren have to die, this land will be ours, or will remain ours. And the first thought that went through the mind was, who is going to populate that dry earth? That wasn't the first thought. That came later. Just the tragedy of it. To so freely offer up children and grandchildren. For my land, my country, my pad, which we have inherited, probably from way back from this animal territorialism. But animals don't defend their territory the way we are capable of defending it or enlarging it. You have a relatively very mellow and peaceful way. Yes. Male animal or female pees around the place, and the others stay off. If they don't, there's some little border skirmish. But there's some natural intelligence in animals in leaving each other alone. If they could read and write and think and make symbols, they would gather allies and move in against each other. This, just as an aside, this invasion of one's pad, one can observe in a retreat. One may feel invaded on one's pad by someone next to one breathing heavily, or making some sounds. He's invading or she's invading my pad. One doesn't quite put it this way, but anger arises. So it doesn't have to be my collective country, it can be my own personal little territory. A woman told me that once, who did a solitary retreat all by herself. She even built her hut in the country, mostly by her own hands. People wondered how would she fare with hunters around, but she was not afraid, and she told me that she actually made friends with some hunters. They were very friendly, worrying about her a little bit. Would she be properly protected? And then one day her windows were abuzz with flies. It was a warm day, it had warmed up. We know how it is when it really gets hot. They come out of the woodwork, flies buzzing all over the windows and over her. And she said, I couldn't believe it, but I took out some paper and just swatted flies to my heart's content. She said, they were invading my territory. That was the feeling. That was the dynamic thought behind it. This is my place. I built it for my retreat. Get out. And she said, yeah, I had been meditating on hunting, hearing the shots around. And I'm not saying it's bad to swat flies. We have fly paper in the kitchen, I think. We're making a different point. How suddenly anger, violence, and the action that follows arises from feeling invaded in one's territory with which one is identified. That's me, it's mine. It's an ancient program. Usually when we start looking at the me, we start with self-image. This time, for some reason, we started with the collective, which becomes the enlarged self-image. The group is me. Anybody who doubts this, question and watch if you belong to any group, including family. What happens when your group is verbally attacked or put down? Questioned. Here, the way we live, it's verbally attacked. In other areas, cities, social classes, countries, as not just verbal attack, it's physical attack. Doesn't immediately defensiveness arise. Defensiveness of my group and attack on the other. Well, you too, or you're worse. Who are you to talk? And defending what is, or seems to be vital to one. One is defending oneself, one is defending one's group. Because the connection is made in the brain that this is me. The identification has taken place. And with this continued identification from generation to generation through education by the parents, deliberate education in what children pick up, our division continues. And we think our security continues because the groups seemingly give us security. But what actually, factually happens is war. Psychological or physical war and terror. For which we have to make ourselves even more secure with more weapons, more walls around our territory. And soldiers along the walls. One person said to me, it's easy for you here to talk about all that. But what when you live in a country like Israel? This person mentioned, my good friend of mine just lost her son. Young son, gone. What do you do when you live in a country? What do you do when you live in this country? right now with patriotism forever on the swell. In his goodbye address, our last president talked directly to children, encouraging them to nail their parents if they don't teach you patriotism. He says, nail them. I don't know quite what he means by that. How do you nail parents? Put nails into them? It means something. Maybe in the next sentence, deploring how there is so little respect for our parents by the children. Can you imagine children being encouraged to reprimand their parents for not teaching? That's nonsense. But it's very significant that it takes place. Broadcast over every television and probably listened by lots of people. Just saw the other day on television news a man, maybe man and woman, who owned a beautiful home in quite a fancy neighborhood, and in response to this decision of the Supreme Court not to call it a crime to burn an American flag, he painted his whole house red, white, and stars all over. His window shades, the whole house was just... And there was uproar in the community. But the painter got more jobs. Nobody came out, the microphone was handed to all these irate neighbors. Nobody came out to say what the nonsense the whole thing is. Even in this country, either one doesn't think about it or one already doesn't dare say it, for fear of being labeled unpatriotic. Are we already afraid of that? Because that's what happened in Germany. One was afraid to speak out. I know when the suggestion was made to make a, constitutional amendment to make it a crime to burn the flag, heard of news, only 3 people out of all the senators and Congress people spoke up. And what the neighbors were upset was how can you maybe resale values of your home when there's such a thing in there? Not very pretty, but then there were the others who followed suit and felt this was a good cause. Good cause for spending $2,500 to show the country that we're for this country. The article, which I just mentioned, also stated that there is some kind of a dis-ease around among people, that we seem to be losing our arch enemy, the Russians, with such a likable guy as Gorbachev at the head. We're all geared, maybe have been geared for the next, I don't know how many 100 years, to have these Russians as our enemies. Our cartoons, the names are Russian of the enemy guy. They roll the R in the Russian way. And now all of a sudden, we don't have that enemy anymore. What does it mean? Does it mean we need a new one? And we will find a new one if this isn't all understood. And it's not a country understanding, it's you and me understanding, examining all of this, and being so free of it that nothing will rope us into that ever again. Adhesion or attachment to any flag or symbol or name, hallowed tradition. Then one already steps on shaky grounds, or dangerous grounds, because one feels my tradition is not dangerous to others. It's peace-loving. Brotherhood creating, or at least has the vision of creating brotherhood. But is it a brotherhood of Christians, or brotherhood of Jews, brotherhood of Buddhists? The vision, brotherhood of Catholics. Sisterhood is in there someplace too. I wonder if one can understand, and don't take my word, one has to think this through oneself and look at it and find how it operates in the way we are with each other, also occasionally at least watching a newscast to be in touch with what's going on. As long as we call ourselves anything, aren't we already in for trouble, for division? And I don't mean call oneself by one's first and last name. We need that for postal address. Or for addressing each other, calling somebody over the intercom. Because with calling ourselves something, an Arab or a Buddhist or Sikh, Catholic or Jew, Muslim, a black or a white or South African or Afrikaner. What goes with calling ourselves that with? Isn't that already the manifestation of an attachment? And does this attachment inevitably create the outsiders who don't belong to this? And doesn't one inevitably feel that one's group is the supreme, the superior one? That's what a Buddhist teacher once told me. If you didn't believe that your religion was the supreme one, you wouldn't belong to it. You would find the supreme one and belong to that. You have to really be convinced of that this is the supreme one. At that moment, there was no statement made about enemies, but it's implied, isn't it? And we're coming to the question now, why do I need that identity? Why do I need to call myself something? Unless it's just from sheer habit. I've always done it, I've heard it, this is what people do, and therefore I don't question it. But here we're bringing up the question. And one can either say, I'm not interested in questioning, and that's all right too. I hope there is no violence going on here in questioning. Why do I need to call myself something? Remembering personally right now, from personal history, having had great difficulty in Germany, not being able to call myself anything. Half Jewish, half Lutheran. You couldn't call yourself anything. No, you better not call yourself half Jewish. You wanted to hide that. And if you had blonde hair, you were able to hide that. Even though I must say that we had lots of friends who knew. Not just half Jewish friends. We had lots of friends who were very kind to us, who didn't buy into all of that. But after living here in this country and joining a Buddhist center and taking the precepts, being taken at the end of taking the precepts, you're told you're now, how was it, in the Buddhist family or something like that. You're now a member of the Buddhist family. Hey, you belong to something now. Something that hadn't happened all your life was taking place right now. And one morning at home, the doorbell rang and two people were outside. They were Mormons, those are the ones who go around, or else the Jehovah's Witnesses, whatever, giving me a long speech about their religion and handing out things and could they come again. I was already being very polite and tried to listen. I didn't really listen. I was just waiting my moment to come in, to tell them off. And when that moment came, they had said their thing, I said, no, thank you. I'm a Buddhist. And I closed the door. And my little son, how old was he then? He was 8 when I joined the center. 9 or 10. He sort of walked in the kitchen there and he said, I'm a Buddhist. I'm a Buddhist. I'm a Buddhist. He didn't quarrel with me. He didn't say, Mom, why did you say that? But something, I've talked about antennae before. That something was picked up. I've never forgotten that. And I felt embarrassed. I couldn't all sort it out. But somehow this child had something that I didn't. Perceived something that I didn't. At that particular moment, he actually, with his friends at the time in the 60s, where it was the thing to be way out on something, he was very proud that his parents were Buddhists. Because that was different from all the conforming, whatever everybody else was. So he also developed this, even though he wanted no part of it. He didn't want to be converted. I don't know from what. Talks take their own course. I hadn't meant to go into all of that. But we have another day. But isn't there a lot to look at? Not condemning people who, when one does this work over a number of years, or maybe just one retreat over a number of days, the sensitivity increases. It happens in the silence, in the open vulnerableness that sets in every once in a while. Sensitivity increases. And suddenly one sees the colors of the leaves, of the clouds and sky, of a caterpillar, or the rising sun with humming bees around. All of that is perceived with enormous intensity, or a little intensity. It doesn't have to be enormous. Beware of comparing oneself to what is being described. But one sees things clearer in nature. The fog over the valley, or the sound of the stream gurgling over the rocks, the sight of Dia. This is all, there's so much more sensitivity in watching and listening. But the same sensitivity is there in watching what goes on within oneself. And one may be appalled by the pain of seeing oneself in all of one's self-centeredness, selfishness, greed, jealousy, whatever all may be coming up, anger, enemy-making, enemy-hating. One can get so down on oneself because of this heightened sensitivity. But can one see being down on oneself as just another manifestation of self and not trust it? It's not indicated. What is indicated is to look clearly what is going on and not condemn it, because the moment condemnation sets in, the vision is blurred. Cannot see clearly when there's condemnation or anger at oneself or anger at others. Or when there's fear of looking, then there can't be clear, open, vulnerable looking, which is as sensitive as looking at the evening sky with its pink clouds and sun just filtering through the forest, the golden spots. So is it possible to be aware of what is revealed and suspending judgment, suspending one's habitual down on oneselfness, or trying to compensate by finding things where one can be up on oneself? It's the same thing. It's all attachment to the story of oneself, which has all of its own autonomous needs and fears and attachments, and the creation of hate for enemies. Can we look? Can there be looking with sensitivity at everything? Including the pain, the sorrow, the grief, the sadness, without resistance or escape. Without just what is. We will end here for today.